had the unfortunate pleasure of meeting me. My name is Dr. Nate. I am an assistant professor in the Educational Studies Department. I'm going to jump straight into this. What I'm going to ask is that if you have any questions, please hold them to the end, and hopefully I will try to address as much of this as possible. All right. So, real quick, I guess, history. I was brought into this situation from work that I did with several community groups. Like most folks, I didn't have a definitive take on charter schools. Can you hear me, Jake?
If you're not going to use the mic, you should turn it off.
Turn the volume off.
Picking up your voice.
Is that better? Thank you. Needless to say, I didn't really have one way or the other a kind of, I guess, definition or feeling about charter schools. My actual first job was at a charter school. Like most people, I've seen this as a vehicle to combat the chronic, really disastrous public education that we've had for over 170 years. But as community folks started asking me questions about a new proposal that was being planned for the city of Indianapolis, just kind of the general feeling of expansion in charter schools, I started investigating and looking and looking and looking. And if you don't remember anything from this presentation, I'm going to borrow from my brother, Dr. Davis Duvall, at UIC in Chicago. He said it best: we've been given shit, here's the nice, shiny new shit. So, the untold truths of education reform, how charter schools and Teach for America support white supremacy. So, from time to time, I'm going to read directly from the slide, although that is bad practice. I just want to go ahead and try to circumvent questions or concerns that I've heard in the past by giving this preamble or disclaimer before we get started. First and foremost, I'm a professor of education. I have 3 degrees in education. I've written, taught about the history of education. I am fully aware of what it has done to people who look like me. So, the trappings of the binary. I fully recognize the role that traditional public education, including institutions like Knox, schools of education, has played in the continual exploitation of those living in poverty, disproportionately black families. As well, I recognize their continual role in the support of white supremacy. Issue with intent. I am an educator, researcher, and activist. I am not a lawyer, which simply means I don't give a damn about intent. Good intentions are often used as colorblind, semantical utterances to minimize the impact of race and somehow give some kind of pass to good intentions. You can keep your good intentions. I don't care. Additionally, needless to say, I have worked alongside with, collaborated with, and evaluated TFAers, Teach for American participants, pro-education reformers, and I truly believe that they believe that they're engaging in this work to combat the same things that I need. This is not a judgment on those individual people or a judgment or assessment on their intent. Like I said, I don't care about that. I care about outcomes. I care about the continual history and exploitation of marginalized families, especially for families that come from a community like mine. So, objective. If you leave here with a new level of skepticism, I've done my job. In the short time that we have together, there is no way that I can go over, what if you include Adam Smith, 200 years of history and policy and education to somehow give you some brand new perspective. I am just going to plant the seeds and start this conversation, hopefully beyond this room, when we think about Ed Reform, TFA, and other organizations like that. So in order to kind of establish this connection, we're going to fly from 30,000 feet from time to time. We're going to drop down. You look at some specific examples, come back up. Additionally, we're going to look at the intersection of history, policy, sociocultural beliefs, and intergroup conflict. We will hover and land, in particular, my home city, and it's not just because it's my home city that I'm talking about it, but for other reasons. Language is paramount. So I want you to understand how important language is and how language is used to create narratives about the success or the illusion of quality. And so I'm big on calling responses. It's going to sound like a conspiracy, but it's not. It's business as usual. So when I say it's not a conspiracy, I want you to respond with it's business as usual. So can we practice that? All right. It's not a conspiracy.
It's business as usual.
All right. So, well, I had the format slide, but we can just go ahead with it. So some terminologies to help ground what we're going to be talking about today. So often I'll interchange these terms as they are specific to a certain item, but I do want to understand and recognize that they're not distinguishably, or they're not necessarily the same thing, and there are distinguishing characteristics of each one. So the first being institutional racism, which kind of refers to the enacting of systemic racism at an institutional level, i.e. Knox School District, church, so on and so forth. Now that is quite different from systemic racism. Critical race theorists, post-colonialists, scholars refer to this as kind of the everyday experience of racism that is enacted at the institutional level, but as well as propped up the underpinnings for white supremacy. Just as much that white supremacy and the notion of whiteness becomes these equivalents or proxies for right, correctness, proper, civility, citizen, pure, power, and human. Now I'm going to use this very broad term of education reformers. Understand that this term is 160 years old. More often than not, we're thinking about ed reformers as it relates within the last 20 to 30 years. Also, I'm going to borrow something from Paulo Freire, who really spent the latter part of his life. So he is the author of Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Who's read that? A couple people. Got any more people reading this? Well, that's what he's most famous for. He wrote that book in 1969. And believe it or not, the latter part of his life, he was fighting this neoliberal corporate free market reform. And although the narrative, the story about this is that it is something new, but it's not. It's been tried in countries across the nation, and I want to talk about that a little bit before we come back to where we are today. So, starting with Paulo. Once again, I'm going to read directly from the side. I want you to understand that he was part of the Workers' Party and became the Secretary of Education in Brazil. And it is almost like a playbook that we can look at Brazil, in particular in the 1980s, I would throw in the 1970s as well, and what happened 30 years ago is happening right now here in America. So this is actually from his last book that he wrote before he passed in 1997. And I want you to, once again, listening to the language. So they were resisting this system over 30 years ago. So therefore, in addition to its late start, advocates of Brazilian public education have consistently battled the powerful interest behind private education, namely the church. This is going to be a recurring theme there. Middle class and upper classes that benefit from the continual subsidies of private and higher education by the state. So what he is saying is that the church and private institutions have benefited from public money being redirected to them and resisting that. This is what the Workers' Party movement was going against. The conservative opposition has held firmly to two principles: that course on religion be taught in the public schools, and that the inherent rights of parents to choose the kind of education their children receive translates into the obligation of the state to subsidize private and religious schooling. For those who do not know, we have a Secretary of Education who has 0 degrees in education, 0 experience in public education, 0 experience as a classroom teacher.
Okay.
Thank you. But I want to circle back to this theme because, once again, it's not a conspiracy. All right, let's try it again. It's not a conspiracy. It's business as usual. All righty. So, vouchers. Who's heard of vouchers before? Okay. So, if you haven't heard, Betsy DeVos and the DeVos family are uber wealthy. I think Bill Gates sprinkled wealth. And they are big proponents or advocates for vouchers. And vouchers allow folks, parents, to provide a different avenue for their child. And then it basically turns the child into a dollar sign. And that child can then go to a different school, and that money follows the kid. Well, a lot of advocacy groups, grassroots organizations, and even the ACLU took particular issue with this, arguing that this breaks the violates the separation of church and state, that public funding would go to a religious-based school. But it made its way all the way up to the Federal Circuit Court judge, I think the Ninth Circuit Court, and they found that it was de facto gifts given to religious organizations. So basically, it is not the state giving money to an individual church, mosque, temple, synagogue. It is a parent. And by definition, then the state has no responsibility. So, okay. I want to take a second right here to pause because I want to add, I want to show you a clip. But here are some questions that I want you to ask amongst yourself. If you haven't heard, I make it work. So, I want you to turn to someone next to you. Ask a simple question. What is free market competition policy? Where does it come from? Where has it been attempted? Is it successful? And who does it benefit? So there's 5 questions. I want you to turn to someone next to you. Hopefully you can tap a professor's shoulder. I see a couple economics faculty in here. I want you to have a conversation amongst yourself, real quick.
Come together. One half is ours, the other half is white. They come together as a partnership. And the idea that they have work out that price they work out. That's the idea that happens. Everything is opposite. So I guess this model is saying that person on the floor?
Yes.
Yeah, I wasn't clear when you talked about the vouchers and that going up, going through the courts. Now, I wasn't clear. Vouchers aren't always for. They're sometimes for secular schools, right? So I wasn't clear about that part of it. It's not always a religious school they go there for.
Correct, but disproportionately, I think, this isn't exact. I want to say over 70%. I don't know why 73.9 is coming to my mind, but over 70% of the vouchers go towards faith-based schools.
Oh.
And in particular, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, what happened, they saw this massive increase of use or request for vouchers. However, the local public school didn't see a dip in enrollment at all. What happened, they had students who were already enrolled in faith-based schools going out and requesting state funding to subsidize their tuition. So that's a whole nother paradigm or another problem that is rarely discussed. So, thinking about this idea of competition, once again, Betsy DeVos has been cited multiple times in this very fundamentalistic belief that vouchers or education reform would be a stepping stone to bring people to God's glory. Just as much, and I don't know if you all caught this 2 months ago, Trump signed another executive order outlining funds specific for expanding the voucher program while taking a cut to the overall general education fund for the United States. All right, now the language of neoliberalism, we don't have the time to go into the history of this. I would definitely encourage you to take some poli-sci classes to brush up on what this actually is. So just in a nutshell, neoliberalism is both an ideal or ideological belief system and an economic policy model. In its most essentialized form, it is this really neoclassical economic belief that free market increases the overall quality of goods as well as increases the overall quality of life for the people within that system. Now, there's a lot of history, complexity to it, but I just want to stick right there. Additionally, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, when I talk about this language, I want you to understand I have been in spaces with very highly educated people with advanced degrees, and they have been duped, taken advantage of by this narrative. So, by no means do I want you to perceive that me discussing this is somehow suggesting that you're naive. I've been pimped by the system before too. I just want to show you pimping. So, neoliberalism and policy, NAFTA. Who's heard of NAFTA? Right? North American Free Trade Agreement started off as this weird highway between Mexico and Canada, but the states really couldn't agree about where the highway should actually go through. So it morphed into this multinational policy, contract, exploitation of the Caribbean countries policy. It really became a cornerstone for the Clinton administration, as well as it became a talking point and really a platform for Trump when going after Hillary Clinton, arguing that NAFTA needed to be renegotiated. But if you actually go early into Trump's campaign, he initially started talking or suggesting that NAFTA needed to be completely annexed, like we just need to get out of NAFTA. But the language quickly shifted to we need to renegotiate NAFTA. Now once again, it is bad practice to read, but I want you to understand the role of why this obscure bill and what it means to education as well as healthcare. So, Dale and Robertson wrote this beautiful article highlighting the earmarks and small little tag-ons to NAFTA. So here's one part to highlight as it relates to education. This means that imported coming goods into the country from another NAFTA country must be treated no less favorably than domestic goods. The agreement views most public goods, such as education, as goods that might also be provided by the market and therefore as tradable items under the same terms as other tradable commodities. One of the clauses within the agreement related to the rules of nationalization states that a public sector good, such as the provisions of compulsory schooling, that's free public education, and healthcare, was to be treated as if they were a private good by the state and therefore a site of investment. So NAFTA literally legalized public health and public education to now be tradable commodities on a global market. I continue. Then it would follow under the rules concerning with investment. The rules protecting investors, for instance, against the risk that might return the privatized schools to the public sector would then be invoked. This is being nationalization of foreign enterprises on economic grounds and prohibited. All nationalizations must be compensated properly at market rate. So that is just a fancy way of saying, not only did they write into the law that public health and public education are now tradable commodities on a global market, they already wrote provisions that if we all became aware of that and was like, no, we don't want to work with that, we're going to make that an actual public good and not a source of investment, we would have to pay back future earnings lost to all these foreign investors. When I continue, I'm going to show you examples of foreign countries that run and operate schools here in America. So I said in the beginning, language is paramount. And we think about the neoliberal education reform language that assists in the narrative being created. So a lot of terms that you will hear as it relates to education and to medicine sound eerily similar, right? So innovation, right? People love throwing that thing around. Innovation, 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 right? Innovation. There's nothing new about this model. Quality, empowering parents, choice. You have the choice, right? It sounds good. Most folks would agree with that. But I want you to listen to language.
Insurance companies, I agree, there's way too much paperwork from insurance companies. I'd like insurance companies to have less power and patients to have more power. So maybe you and I could agree on a common sense reform of allowing LaRonda to purchase health insurance in any of the 50 states. Right now, she's a Texan. It's illegal for her to purchase health insurance anywhere else. That would give her choice. If she doesn't like what the Texas companies are offering, she can go to Oklahoma, she can go to Florida, she can go to any other state. That creates a 50-state national marketplace. It drives down cost. It increases choices. Why don't we stand together against the insurance companies and agree on that reform?
Well, I think
Y'all catch that? Innovation, choice, power, right? Consumer oriented.
Timing.
Just a quick comment. We had a good conversation about innovation, how it can help in health, education, impact of foreign aid and energy, and a wide-ranging conversation about the power of innovation.
Once again, it's not a conspiracy. Right, so, and I can show you a lot more videos, but I want you to pay attention to the conversation that is being framed. So, once again, trying to give you the most generic form of what this free market competition model looks like from a policy standpoint. It is the fundamental idea that if you increase competition, that you will increase quality and innovation and drive down cost. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. Well, in order to increase competition, you have to create the need for it. You have to show and demonstrate that whatever is in existence right now is obsolete, antiquated. It needs to be changed. It needs to be innovative. So, once again, where did this come from? The idea is over 200 years old. The idea of the invisible hand somehow driving or is a reflection of the prosperity of the people, and that human beings will always buy within their own personal interests. If you all reach into your pockets, you have not bought into your own personal interests. I.e. the phone that came out next last year. It's going to be replaced in 6 months. So when we think about how is this very rigid economic approach added to education, we can go back to 1955. And there's a couple points in the next couple slides. I'm going to pivot between centuries a little bit so that you can see the correlation. So Milton Friedman, who's heard of Milton Friedman? Okay. Nobel laureate recipient for economics, University of Chicago, so on and so forth. In 1955, he wrote a policy brief entitled "The Role of Public Education," the role of government in public education. And more or less, and this is where that 1955 comes in, becomes very important. He argued that the infusion of competition in the form, now he didn't use necessarily the term vouchers, but it was something to the extent of vouchers, would increase the infrastructure of failing schools across the nation. Now, most folks didn't pick up on this or really bat an eye about it. But, once again, this innovation is something new. The first forms of school choice happened in the 1960s. The first one was 1968 in Louisiana, followed by North Carolina and Georgia. They were exclusive legal moves or maneuvers to keep white schools white and black schools black. That's why you have like 2012, 2013 documentaries, on schools in the South that still have segregated prompts, right? We could go back to this first school choice model that came out of the idea of Milton Friedman. And this was in direct opposition to something that happened in 1954. Anybody remember what happened for education in 1954? Oh, that Knox is paying off now. All right. Now, once again, there's this constant language about this is something new. Now, whenever you push on ever-formers or neoliberals about this idea, bring up Chile. And what happened to President Salvador Allende. And how a CIA-backed coup, it's already been declassified. We were responsible. We supported the military dictator who eventually was put on trial for war crimes. But the Nixon administration was becoming leery. This is the heart of the Cold War. A socialist country in South America. And basically what they did, they took their major natural resource, copper, out of the hands of private companies and made it a property and a business of the people. And it really was the only thing that saved their country. But after they had killed the democratically elected socialist president, they put in this military dictator. And using Milton Friedman's idea of free market competition, the University of Chicago partnered with the Catholic University of Chile, church coming back into play here, to infuse the economy with competition. And this was the first time that we saw on a grand scale free market competition as it relates to not only personal goods, but education. And inevitably, it resulted in the displacement of indigenous, more darker-skinned Chileans to the outskirts of the country. If you looked at any of the FIBA game, the Olympic Games in South America, and just investigate a little bit more, you would come to find that most of these countries are a class apartheid. It's really the haves and have-nots. So we already know the outcome of this model. Once again, but it's being articulated to us now as something new. So, and it's not just Chile, Brazil, Malawi, Nigeria, Uganda, Zambia, a lot of different countries around the world who have faced some form of financial crises have employed some form of market competition. Inevitably, we still see, or it still yields the same results of displacement of marginalized minority, racial, and ethnic groups. Additionally, a displacement of students who receive special needs services who have physical or cognitive disabilities. This is 70s, 80s, 90s, early 2000s. But what is this new thing that you're talking about? So I'm going to come back to 1954, interest conversion. For those who are not familiar with the notion from critical race theory, basically CRT scholars argue that racial progression, whether socially or through legislation, only occurs when whites have a shared interest in racial progression that does not fundamentally alter the benefits of whiteness. Scholars argue that the asymmetrical racial caste system serves the existing power structure of white supremacy, and that changes to the power structure only occurs when the changes benefit the interests of those it favors, whites. Bell argued that the Supreme Court decision to desegregate schools had more to do with our imperialism and less with the subjugation of black citizens. He argued that changing the hearts of most non-white, underdeveloped communist countries. Remember, we were steeped in the Cold War. We wanted to persuade other countries that they should take our form of democracy. And an argument from the Soviet Union was, well, how can you talk about your democracy? Look how you're treating your blacks. Right? And you're going to go to a country mostly of black folks and tell them that they need to adopt your system? So what we know from declassified Supreme Court decisions that, yes, it was pressure from the administration, pressure from conglomerate companies to actually change the decision in favor of desegregation. Additionally, it was a form of pacification for blacks who for some time were questioning, hey, we were fighting to liberate the oppression in Europe, what about the oppression here? Additionally, it added an opportunity maybe to revitalize the South that since the Civil War was still in economic disarray. So, once again, this history is coming into play. Starting with Milton Friedman, it's important to understand, and this is where it gets very complicated. This is not an idea. This is not an approach that is exclusive for one side of the aisle. The first form of school choice came in the form of anti-Brown v. Board school choice in schools in the South. However, school choice was used to create the freedom schools in Mississippi as well as in Oakland. And understand that different presidents have used this same approach. Most notably, and I would argue to the most extreme, Barack Obama. This idea that competition will drive quality, i.e. race to the top. This idea that competition, per pupil funding, nationwide would drive competition. Because if you want to keep your school doors open and keep the money that is sitting in this room, then you need to give them the highest quality education. So, in reform today, I don't know if you saw this was a couple of weeks ago, my former governor, Mike Pence, and now our vice president, hashtag and the hypocrisy in the statement is hilarious, right? So now as a former governor, and he's, massaging Trump's ego right now. I've always believed, as the president does, that education is a state and local function, and that the decisions in education are best made by the parents and teachers and local administrators. The decision over our children's schools should be made by parents, empowering parents, and local administrators, not by politicians or unelected bureaucrats in a far distant capital. It's funny because Indiana just took away the democratically elected state superintendent. So now it is a now appointed position by the governor, his former position. The president believes the same thing, and the efforts that he will take today through the executive order will continue the process of empowering our families, empowering our states to ensure that every child in America has access to a world-class education. Once again, listen to the narrative. A lot of times I see across campus, or I hear in passing, conversations about why do people support Trump? Why do people support Barack Obama? Understand that this narrative is not exclusive for one side of the aisle. And that most people would agree with these things. Empowering parents, letting them have control in their kids' lives and the quality of education that they get. Most people would agree. So, to be clear, charter schools have been around for now 27 years. Really was birthed out of resistance. It was 7 teachers in Minnesota was like, bump what the district is doing, we're going to do our own thing. Yeah, I'm with that. But through this process of co-opting, it has become something Totally different. So, with over 25 years of charter school success, I want to be very clear, and this is where I want to argue, but charter schools don't work. Now, someone could say, oh, well, I could go to this charter school over here, and they're doing great work. Well, that's fine. I can go to this traditional public education that's doing the exact same thing. Right? There's always exceptions to the rule. Yes, there are phenomenal charter schools that are doing what we would want them to do. Changing the lives of their students, affirming them, and making them great learners and critical thinkers for tomorrow. But on average, looking at the aggregate, once again, I'm not concerned about exceptions or intent. I'm looking at outcomes. Charter school performance has not statistically outperformed traditional public education. So you have to ask yourself the question, if this is something that is touted as the change agent, the thing that's going to bring about change and fix failing schools and help black and brown and poor white children, it hasn't done it. So why are we still going down this path? So, normally when I say this, I get the rebuttal, well, what about the Credo report? Credo report comes out of Stanford University. And the most recent one has suggested that in particular cities, that charter schools are outperforming traditional public schools. Also, I want to make it clear that you understand that charter schools are public schools. They receive tax funding. They're just a new version of the old game. Now, when it comes to the Credo report, it's Stanford, it's an Ivy League, they must have it right. Let's be clear, it is not a peer-reviewed study. It is a report. So you can't argue high quality when you don't use high quality research. Just as much, there have been a lot of problems with the actual methodology that they have used and their lack of explanation of how they find their results. I personally draw issue with their virtual control record. So what they do is statistically duplicate a student and send that student to their neighborhood school and to a different charter school. And then somehow, through some algorithm, figure out how each student would perform. And they have like a very horrible explanation for propensity score matching to control for selectivity, which is a very fancy way of saying they're not really sure what they're doing. Additionally, the National Education Policy Center has come out and outlined, this is just from their executive summary, 8 major problems with the report. So if you did not hear, last year the NAACP put a moratorium on charter schools, basically saying that we don't support any form of charter schools. And a lot of the resistance was saying, well, the report says that they're actually doing good. To be clear, they have not improved. But a lot of the narrative created is that this is better. So, why does the nation need to watch Indiana or Indianapolis in particular? This is not just because this is my home state and my home city. Unfortunately, we have the most progressive education reform policy in the nation. Anyone heard of the Religious Freedom Bill? Yeah, unfortunately, that was my state. Right? We do everything first, for whatever reason. Alec, if you haven't heard of the American Legislation Education Council, I implore you to go and look at them. They gave out a report on education last year, and they ranked Indiana, they gave Indiana the highest grade, a B+. And Mike Pitts wrote the foreword for that report. And it hailed Indiana as a trailblazer for progressive education reform. Just last week, Betsy DeVos took a look at Indianapolis Public Schools and said their innovation network is what every school district should model themselves after. We're going to talk about that, what that looks like now. So, it's important to understand that it's not all doom and gloom. It's not this binary. Current education reform has done a tremendous job at highlighting issues that scholars have been pointing at for years. They've put it to the forefront of a lot of people's mind. Kudos, hands, sprinkles to what they're doing. That's great. Additionally, they have challenged the pre-existing system and questioned the merit of public education. All thumbs up, great job. However, some concerns, namely profiting off of children. Understand that for-profit entities are running schools. Foreign businesses are running schools. untested and unproven models on black children. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. To be clear, when we think about the strategies, the techniques that effectively change the life of urban youth, it has nothing to do with what type of school it is. Whether it's a magnet or a math and science charter or a music charter, it doesn't matter at all. It matters. The number one changing variable as it relates to academic achievement is the adult in the room, the teacher. Additionally, authorizers and sponsors maintaining low-performing schools while profiting. I actually brought the publication. If you want to take a look at it, you can look it up. My former advisor and I did a publication on Ball State University, and since 2001, they have made over $20 million while operating some very horrible schools, and I'm going to show you an example of how they're making money. So to be clear, in the state of Indiana, and why we're looking at Indiana is because it's the most aggressive, and this is very similar. If you look at Illinois, language is almost verbatim. Indiana State Code clearly states that no authorizer, no entity that can give out charters can give out charters to a for-profit company. So let's say if Walmart wanted to start a charter school. Walmart couldn't do that. But let's say Karen wanted to start a charter school. Karen can then partner with Walmart, a for-profit company, because the state's not giving it to a for-profit company. We're giving it to Karen. So, I don't have a lot of time to go over this, but EMOs and CMOs, education management organizations, charter management organizations, this is another form of how entities can make money. The difference between the two, EMOs are for-profit, CMOs are not-for-profit. And by the way, if you haven't heard this, just because someone says they're non-profit doesn't mean anything. If you want to look at a clear example, look at the CEO of Red Cross. Check how much money is spent when you donate to Red Cross to the actual aid that is to the person. Right? Don't be fooled by the nonprofit title. The majority of charter schools in the nation, in Chicago, everywhere, they're mostly independent. But that isn't to say that folks still aren't making money. So in the state of Indiana, this is kind of what it looks like. Let's say Karen wants to start a charter school for military, a military charter school, right? On the west side of Galesburg, right? So there would be someone in the state that could authorize her to do that. She may make a contractual agreement with a for-profit company to help her run her military school, or use a charter management organization. Has anyone heard of KIP Academy? Yep, that's a CMO. So that's a nonprofit management organization that takes a cut of money given to that individual school. So, black children have never came off the auction block. Her pupil funding explicitly ties ADM, the money allotted for tuition support, to that child. And where that child goes is reflected on the funding sources of that school. Now, think to yourself, why aren't we seeing charter schools in affluent suburbs of St. Louis, Chicago, Indianapolis, Cincinnati, Denver? More often than not, disproportionately, urban youth, specifically black children, usually come with extra funding. So in Chicago, I want to say the ADM is like $7,800. So young child from the south side is worth $7,800, but you add Title I funding from the federal government, that child's now worth about $14,000. Now this is where we get into the money making and how people can exploit it while black children have never come off the auction block. So Indiana Imagines Academy, the Imagine Schools is a model out of the state of Nevada. Ball State is the sponsor, the one who gives out the charter. And Imagine School is an EMO, it's a for-profit company. It received an F grade. This is just from 1 year. This is the 2012-2013 academic year. And this is just a handful of schools I picked randomly out of Indianapolis. Over 80% black. Ball State University, from allowing that felony school to stay open, it received nearly $150,000. Imagine's Academy, or Imagine Sciences, out of Nevada, received anywhere from $439,000 to $732,000 from that one school in 1 year. There are no rules or explicit laws that prevent the contractual agreement between the two of you. There's no parameters for how much she can charge. I'm sorry, what's your name? Dojo? Doja? I'm getting close there. Right. So if you were to charge her, you could charge her 8%, 15% of how much those students go to her expense. So that $14,000, you get 8%, 15, 20% of it. The Detroit Free Press did a 8-day expose on this same matter and found a lot of the schools that were sponsored or received funding from the DeVos Foundation were engaging in backdoor policy and basically paying each other off. Another school, Indiana Connections Academy. Has anyone heard of like Illinois Connections Academy, Iowa Connections Academy, the virtual school, the online school? They always had that cheesy commercial with like, this is the younger me, and whatever. If you actually do a little bit of research, you'll find that that school is owned by Pearson. If you look at most of your textbooks, Pearson. Adobe, Pearson. Penguin, the military test, SAT, the GED. They own the two largest data management systems, SASE and DataSync. They are the largest educational assessment and education textbooks company in the world, and they're based out of the UK. And they're making somewhere over $1 million just in management fees from that one school. And there's connection academies in, I think, 36 of the 50 states. That's one school, 1 year, in just one state. So, what does this look like? What is this narrative and talking about white supremacy? Thinking about the actual experience that these students are receiving in some of these schools. So this is West Gary Lighthouse in Gary, Indiana, right outside of Chicago. Over this 5 to 6 year period. And these are students who have passed both the math and English portions of the state test. They started off with roughly 17%, peaked around 42%. And this school was still able to stay open and operate. Think about how many children have been affected. What about the other 80-some% that didn't pass, that now are somewhere? And at this same time, Ball State University collected over $613,000 from tuition support costs for being the authorizer of this one school. Another school, Timothy Johnson Academy, another Ball State school, abysmal scores. Less than 10% were passed in both math and English. By 2012, they have raised it to 42%. In that same time period, $319,000 was collected from Ball State University. Charter School of the Dunes, which was somehow illegally erased from every database. We had to do a Freedom of Information Act to actually get this information. Once again, abysmal scores. Still allowed to stay open. Ball State is still an authorizer of charter schools. And that same time period from this one school, they collected over $700,000. Once again, these schools are predominantly black schools. And these kids have never came off the auction block. But it's innovation. It's new, it's changed, it's different. It's going to change the predicament of what we found ourselves in before. So there are a whole host of issues that continue this exploitation, this atrocity that happens in cities all across the nation. So, folks in the room, to be clear, Black Lives Matter has a moratorium on charter schools. And if you check out their website, they have clear stances about the privatization of education. I encourage you all to check that out. Additionally, when we think about what is going on within this space, what we find is that there is a lot of outside interests buying politicians, as well as school board seats. So, once again, just so you don't think I'm just tossing out numbers. Charter schools are a source of profit. So, to give you one example, Earl Martin Phelan, CEO of Phelan Leadership Academy, operates one charter school in Indianapolis and one innovation network. He received a salary of $284,745 in 2013. The superintendent of Indianapolis Public Schools doesn't make that amount of money. I forgot to mention, Phelan doesn't even live in Indianapolis. He lives in Boston. So understand that this free market, open competition across states sounds a lot like healthcare. You can have folks who look like us making a lot of money on schools that aren't doing well. So, how is this achieved at the local level? Well, you buy the vote. You buy the politicians, you buy the school board. You implant these managerial organizations. In the city of Indianapolis, it's the Mind Trust. Detroit, there's an equivalent to it. Nationally, there's the Education Trust, as well as the Center for Reinventing Public Education. You push the narrative. You win over communities by buying allegiance and loyalty. So, literally, in the city of Indianapolis, apart from a handful of grassroots, very small organizations, there's three black organizations that haven't sold out. Surprisingly, the NAACP, Concerned Clergy, and Kepler Institute. But 100 Black Men, Urban League, Black Men Alliance, they all sold out. And I can tell you how much they've sold out for too. So, this is what you get. In Chicago, Cincinnati, St. Louis, Indianapolis, Denver, New Orleans, Miami, Baltimore, Boston, New York, you get this network of organizations, usually governed by one kind of parent organization. Once again, in the city of Indianapolis, you have the Mind Trust, who brought in Teach for America in 2007, Teach Plus, which is very similar. And these are a whole host of other organizations, including KIP, that you may be familiar with, and even Stand for Children. Now, what they do, once again, don't be duped by the nonprofit status. Oh, I'm going to go work for a nonprofit. You might want to do a little bit more research. So understand, we can just take a look at a couple organizations. Phelan Leadership Academy, the same CEO that lives in Boston and make money. I'm going to show you how they actually share money between each other in order to sell children. So Stand for Children has two PACs. 504, is it 504c? Is that the PAC for evaluation for elections? I think that's what it's called. They have another arm that they can feed money to candidates. So, Stand for Children PAC, which has a Portland, Oregon address, Stand for Children PAC Indiana, which also has a Portland, Oregon address, gave over $23,000 to a local representative. Why is there a PAC out of Portland, Oregon, giving tens of thousands of dollars to an Indiana representative? Well, Robert Bain was the lead author for Public Law 1321, which became the dummy bill, House Bill 2009, which also is being replicated in Illinois, Michigan, Florida, Texas, and North Carolina. Right now, they're in the House. And basically, what this law does is circumvent federal mandates to allow schools to compete. Once again, a lot of outside funding, a lot of outside money coming in to buy local folk. So here's an example, Portland, Oregon address, almost 6,000, one donation, another 6,000, $36,000 coming from Democrats for Every Reformer, which is out of New York. Someone from San Francisco giving over $10,000. Michael Bloomberg, the former mayor of New York, giving over $20,000. Why are these folks investing in a local school board? They don't live here. They don't have residence here. What's going on? So to be clear, up until 2010, you, myself, we could run for a local school board election. Raise $2,000 to $3,000, you could successfully win. But when these networks come in, similar to the Mind Trust Network in 2012, now it becomes a $50,000, $70,000 job to win an election, and a school board election. So to give you an example, here's the 2012 and 2014 amount of money that these representatives collected just for, to piss him off. Here's David Harris, is the CEO of Mind Trust Salary. Once again, here's just some of the sources of money coming from different places. It's not a conspiracy. Okay. I want you to understand that this is happening in cities everywhere. And what it means is that ordinary people, like you and me, we can no longer run for these simple seats on a school board. That these other interests are driving this change. Once again, this is not localized just to one city. It's happening in at least 39 other urban spaces across the nation. So why? Why? Why is this happening? Well, this is former Mayor Greg Ballard. Him, the Deputy Mayor Jason Claw, have all argued this is about bringing the tax base back to the city. So, changing schools become a vehicle for gentrification. Because when someone goes to buy a house, they want to buy a house in a good neighborhood that has good schools. We know that's racialized coded language for schools that don't have a lot of students who look like me. And through this practice of, this is about bringing the tax base to the urban core so that we can revitalize and engage in urban renewal, right? So what you're saying is, this is about bringing the tax base back to the city, so inevitably the people who are already there aren't worth investing in. What happens to them? Oh, well, we're going to empower them, give them choice and innovation. But when we go back to look at Brazil, Chile, these countries around the world, those folks usually get displaced. So it becomes this very sophisticated game of hot potato, right? So who's going to push those living in poverty? Oh, well, that should go out to the district, the suburbs. So, once again, the goal of gentrification means that school boards is maintaining the support of racial segregation in IPS and in nations or in cities across the nation. So, for example, the Center for Inquiry, these are very affluent schools, are disproportionately white. 84 and 57 are 85% white, even though Indianapolis Public Schools only has 20 to 25% white students. Same thing is happening on the north side of Chicago with College Prep. And this disproportionate relocation and resegregation. So to understand that there is a private interest driving this idea. This idea that the people who disproportionately look like myself aren't worth investing in. And it goes hand in hand with CRT scholars' material determinism. And the fact that the elite, the white elite, determine the experience based upon the value that we have for my community when it comes to our form of education and life, and form of life and living. So this idea of reversing white flight inevitably is displacing us and never really addressing why white flight occurred in the first place. So, Teach for America. So to be completely transparent, what they have done well, increasing the racial diversity of new teachers. Hats off, kudos. They have created a pipeline that schools of education have failed to really address in attracting non-white teachers. So they get props for that. Additionally, created pipelines for administration and education policy work. So they have built into their system a pipeline beyond the classroom, which is something that schools of education can very much learn from. So once you go into the classroom, what can happen beyond that space? And they also provide in-service training for teachers, which is something that a lot of schools of education, none of which I've ever come across, actually do. Once again, there are a lot of lessons to be learned. However, it is still a managerial arm of white supremacy. To be clear, they are not unique. I could put Teach Plus, Teach Step, Education for Us. There's a lot of organizations that are just simple. TFA is just easy because most people recognize it. They send the least trained people to the areas that need the most training. To be clear, this isn't something new. Education research has, well, from now, for 84, so I would say over 30 years, we've known in urban spaces we need the most trained, the most experienced teachers. But TFAers go through a 5-week intense training. They have a very rigorous review process, but they are the least trained in urban spaces. Additionally, they have a horrible retention record, and they'll even admit that. There's this almost revolving door for TFAs, which, from a budgetary standpoint, isn't a bad thing. Because if you think of it like this, if I take some young folks who are in between their next job or their next career choice, or they're waiting to go to grad school, hey, why don't you come and make a difference in someone's life? Right? I can pay you the bottom dollar with the full expectation that I will never have to pay you your life salary or your health benefits, because the idea is that you're going to move on to something else. So from a budgetary standpoint, that's a great idea. I can keep the cost, my human capital costs, down, create a surplus, and give the illusion that I'm increasing quality. Additionally, in that process, it deprofessionalizes my profession. No offense, but teaching is not a stepping stone for something else. I hate when people come to me with that. That is so disrespectful. Additionally, it continues this cycle of sending the most unprepared, the most untrained, the people who replicate the same system that they think they are fighting, to the people that they think they're saving. Once again, and I said this in the beginning, I'm not questioning intent. A lot of people go into this for quote-unquote the right reasons. But you can save your good intentions. Our community does not need it. Okay? So, questions? Okay, well let's do this because I'm not good with awkward silence.
Nate, I do have a question.
Yes.
Nate, the model you're setting up is that with the charter school, you have the federal funding coming into the school, and then it's being channeled, it's bypassing the educational process or system within the school, and then it's going into these hidden for-profit systems. Could you explain more fully, though, what's the internal funding within the school that allows this to happen? And what is the role of the educators, the role of the faculty? Do they not have any agency in terms of how this process is actually happening? Could you explain that more fully?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And I apologize for not explaining fully before. Thank you for the question. It's two parts. One, that PL 1321, that law that I was referring to, it gives more autonomous power to individual schools, and explicitly outlines this idea of autonomy. So to be clear, the research does support that if a school leader, like a principal, has more power, the quality of the school does go up. The research supports that. However, they more or less prostitute that and go a little bit too far. And what happens is the laws haven't caught up to the contractual agreements that individual principals can make and or districts can make. So there are provisions or laws to protect, and teachers really don't have the agency because they don't have the administrative status or the vote. So that really the only people who could oppose it are the school board members. That's why they intentionally go to buy those school board members to believe into that narrative. And I mean, Gail Cosby, who I do a lot of work with, is a former IPS school board, and she was bought. And then she kind of wised up and said, hold on, what are y'all doing? And they have some very dark tactics. Does that clear that up?
Yeah, is there any movement though on the part of more liberal educators to try to again counteract what's going on? I mean, I just wondered if there's just any kind of enlightened effort to really start to counteract what's happening.
Yeah, selfish plug here. Hey, it's a mixed batch. So to be completely transparent, there isn't a real playbook. So what I've personally done, I've created multiple videos where I try to take this presentation and chunk it out and give it, in a digestible amount to regular folk. So one part is awareness. Now there are clear examples of resistance, usually two forms. One, I can point to Denver, where basically they just started civil disobedience and they kept interrupting the school board meetings to the point that they actually found a law that where they could, remove an elected official. So that's one way. The other one, and it's actually a concern of mine, and I'm writing a piece about it. A lot of community folks are wise to the game. And they're kind of to the point where they're like, okay, there's too much money for us to fight. So let's say, we're going to take your money, but understand we're going to do our own thing. So New Jersey, Newark in particular, has done a great job of doing that. However, my concern is it never really fundamentally changes why the system exists, or, sad to say, desegregation never existed, so it never really addresses that issue, and it continues to replicate the system of segregationists who like the idea of black families, oh yeah, y'all do y'all thing. And it exonerates any responsibility for mostly white teachers from not having the ability or the skills to actually teach those students. So there are forms of resistance, but no collective effort. The Advancement Project did a great piece on that. Yeah.
It almost sounds like it's going to have to be in the hands of the students and the parents, right? Is that kind of what you're getting at? And,
yeah. First getting educated and then resisting.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
I just wanted to know, so what advice would you give? So I feel like I know you said like a lot of community members are wise to the game. So I know a lot of my peers, for example, like I'm not really thinking about like high school education systems and elementary education systems. I'm not an ed major. But in terms of like post-bachelor's degree careers and stuff like that, I have heard a lot of encouragement of, here are these programs that you can join that will help you transition to whatever your life is, whatever actual career choice you make, like Teach for America and things like that. So what advice would you give to students who are, I guess, either tempted by the supposed benefits that Teach for America offers, or students who are already immersed in these programs, and what change they can have through their already involvement in it?
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Phenomenal question. Now, to be clear, I want to establish that there aren't any clean hands in this paradigm, right? So no one's going to walk through this pure. There's no pure perspective. Now, with that being said, if I were to give my authentic advice, if I were to give it to my own sister, it would be definitely no TFA. I'm hesitant on Peace Corps because it's an extension of American imperialism in mostly underdeveloped countries. Now, with that being said, that doesn't mean that I've seen some really phenomenal things come out of that. Now, to be clear, there is a teaching shortage across the entire nation. And there are tons of transition to teach programs that you can receive a master's. What is really hot now is MBAs in education leadership combined, and you get a salary while you're doing it. There's a lot of programs in a lot of major cities. Take advantage of those. When you get the traditional training that is needed, not to say that it is at all adequate, but will help you be better prepared if you so choose to go in the classroom. So there are alternative routes versus the more advertisements. And I would be glad to encourage any transition program out there, and you can run past me and we can definitely have a conversation about it.
What does your ideal model look
Ooh.
like? How do we get there?
Okay, it's not fleshed out.
Yeah.
First, I don't think one individual person could ever propose a system. Something that hopefully on my sabbatical I'll be able to actually finish, but it's an education revolution. I think that the paradigm of what school should be should change and alter every 10 years, and that there should be a nationwide committee governing that, not any elected officials. Now, there's another side to this that I am constantly being pulled towards, but I'm not quite fully to say I stand on. But they're, including my advisor, my previous advisor, there are folks who believe this was a poor, not effective social experiment. Public education doesn't work. And I'm not quite there, but I see the merits in that argument. Once again, 170 years of public education, it hasn't changed, the curriculum has not changed, and what we know from the history, from economists, sociologists, it's really just a sorting system for the labor class. Now that isn't to say that there aren't opportunities where people make exceptions, like myself, somehow make it through the system. But there's something fundamentally flawed within the system. And it goes back to a great quote that I use a lot in class from David Tyack and Peter Cupin. And it's simply, schools become the scapegoats and the panacea for society. Basically, they are the cure for the world's cancer as well as the cause of it. And no organization can beat that. So a lot of times people think if we fix schools, well, then we'll fix society. There is no data, no history that actually backs that up. Although most people believe in that logic. So there is something fundamentally wrong in this belief that once some child walks through my threshold, society ills, the problems somehow stop at that threshold. And it doesn't. It's just embodied even in this space. So I'm somewhere in between the two.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that like we're focusing on like the different types of schooling and how like charter schools, they are a part of public schools, but how basically the profiting from that. But also within public schools, I wanted to emphasize like the segregation within that, about the different tracks that they have. They have the regular tracks where you take the regular classes, and then there's honors, and there's AP, and even within that you can see the segregation. And I'm from Denver. I go to DPS, Denver Public School. I went to a charter school beforehand as well, and we saw that a lot. And like they're trying to do really better job at it, but just to see that like even at a public school who's like really good, they had that desegregation within the classrooms where AP classes, it's all these AP teachers who have so many trainings that they go to, usually white, and usually white students in those classes, and then you go to regular classes that you don't even read the books for like Shakespeare or something. Like they dumb it down all the way, and just to show that there's segregation and racism within like those type of, you know.
Definitely, this is not a this isn't a new thing. This is a learned behavior. So one example, a lot of critical scholars point to magnet schools, which would come out of the 80s, as a direct response to circumvent segregation. Once again, believe it or not, you can double check this, there are only 2 cities in the nation that actually did full citywide two-way busing. That was Indianapolis and Seattle. That was it. Mostly every other city was one-way busing in regards to desegregation. So that's why a lot of scholars argue that desegregation never really happened. And the problem is that whiteness was always 2 steps ahead of desegregation. So in the first form, it was school choice in the South to keep white schools white. In the late 70s and 80s, it was magnet schools to let just the selected, you know, the good black folks in, right? And now this new form is charter schools. Once again, it's just kind of a repackaging of the same thing and the practices that have been in place for over 170 years.
So Nate, you started with, well, 2 questions. One, you started with 1954 as your launching off point, and then desegregation and resegregation. But what if we go a bit further? What is your take on the argument that desegregation undermined the black community and black institutions? including black schools. What's your take? Do you agree with that idea, or how would you complicate it? And then secondly,
Okay.
I'm wondering about, so you said that public schools and charter schools perform more or less the same. But if the control for, say, public schools in the hood, where I went to school, I'm guessing, I don't know, I'm guessing that in those cases, maybe the charter schools are a better option. And indeed, that's the argument I think that Republicans make. Look at those schools in their neighborhoods. Let's get them out of their neighborhoods and get them to better schools. So if you control for rate policy, if you control for where the schools are, the public schools are, the numbers would look better for the charter schools. Is that right?
Yeah, so the first question, yes, wholeheartedly agree. Jack Doherty did a book about Milwaukee schools and talked about once desegregation happened, understanding that the multiple cases that make up the Brown v. Board case, they all didn't want desegregation. They just wanted the same funding that was given to white schools. But in that book, as well as, I forgot the sister's name, but The Highest Potential, who did a book on a school in South Carolina that more or less was a beacon of light for the South, and through desegregation was underfunded. A lot of folks may not understand, most teachers in black schools were highly educated because we couldn't get jobs as professors in public institutions. So it wasn't uncommon in the 20s, 30s, 40s-ish to have a second grade, third grade teacher who had a PhD.
Yeah, I would add to that also, the NAACP was complicit in this model that denied local black schools, the model that local black schools are demanding equal funding. NAACP said that we were in the South. They said we do not support that model. We will only support the integrationist argument. That is the only way we're going. If you deviate from that, then you have to do that somewhere else. You can't do that within the NAACP structure.
Right, and it was interesting the role that NAACP played in the 60s to ensure that desegregation happened and occurred in cities, in particular Seattle and Indianapolis. To your second question, this is where it gets conflated, and there isn't any exclusive data. The one article I can remember, last name is Love, and I forgot the other author's last name, in 2012, they did a meta-analysis of just urban spaces. And what they found, and in most, when you start any organization, you have your first starting point, and there's like a dip. I forgot what it's called in economics, but then there's like a check mark. It looks like a Nike sign, right? And what they found was that it was actually financially and academically more valuable to start a new traditional public education than a charter school. Additionally, what makes it difficult when we look at the success of certain schools, most charter schools are exempt or can't have access to the property tax because students are coming from different zones, different zip codes, different boroughs. And because of that, that 1% property tax or whatever the state formula is, that's usually supporting one, student special needs services and transportation. So the conversation is, yes, this school on the west side, the charter school is doing phenomenal, but most of the people who go there are upper middle class blacks. And the only reason they can access that school is because they have the mode of transportation to get to that school. And that's part of one of the issues with the Credo report that was never addressed. How can you handle something as simple as transportation? Just as much, and I didn't get to talk about, as students who receive special needs services, a lot of those students are pushed out to the traditional public schools where you see a heightened number of students who receive special needs services because they're counseled out and suggested, well, your child would do better at that school. They have the infrastructure and the facilities to do that. So you should go back to the traditional public school, which beefs up the numbers of the charter school. And that's a practice that comes back in the 60s. So that wasn't something new that charter schools started. Jay?
So kind of like a devil's advocate question. So like you said that you're kind of in between like getting rid of public education in general.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that kind of like a middle ground would be going back to how, I don't know when it was, when you had like in lower income areas, instead of having like the traditional education we see today, you had professional, like you had more like professional trade schools. So would you say that that's like a middle ground? And then how do you, if that is the middle ground, then how do you counteract the fact that that doesn't allow for upward social mobility.
Yeah, and that's probably why I would disagree with it in the first place. It continues that cycle of directing folks into a labor class. So oftentimes, trade schools are targeted in poor white communities and communities of color. And they're encouraged to go to those positions because it's high work, secure employment, but low level of expectation in regards to education and upward mobility. So I wouldn't necessarily agree with that type of model as being a middle ground. I think something that, so it's important to understand what higher education plays a role. Higher education, public land grants were created to create institutions outside of market influence. The founders of this country believed that they wanted space that wasn't impacted by the market. Jefferson is probably one of the best examples of that. So if we think about colleges and universities that predate public education, I would love to see a space that isn't marked by what job you're going to. Because inevitably, all of you are here to get a job. And to me, I think that's partly problematic. Because how can you be here to experience this liberal, enriching education, but inevitably still be serving this arm of labor? So that's also a little troubling for me as well. So one last question. Any last questions?
Could you say more about, say, how the relevance of Knox College, for example, to some of the questions you're asking? How would you, what's your critique of a college such as Knox?
Knox is not exempt from playing the role of prestige and notoriety and name. It's not exempt from practices that don't serve the better need of humankind. But that's not different than most institutions across the nation. Yes, Marie.
What about like the student teachers at like Galesburg High School? Would you say that that's kind of the same thing as like Teach for America, where like we go in for a term?
Yeah, and that's problematic. There's another article I'm working on. It is my belief that we don't train teachers enough. And I would love to actually borrow something maybe from medicine, where you go through like your core curriculum, the content classes, like the class you're taking in, right? And then you're in some form of residency. You're still getting a salary, right? But you're still under the guidance of the institution and people within that space. And then after that moment, you are, being endowed with you are a full educator, whatever. But that would take a societal shift and move away from paying teachers the least amount of money out of any profession that we do.
Yeah.
Once again, we want them to cure the world of every ill, but then pay them pennies on the dollar. All right, peace and love to all.
Peace and love.